issue. We'll start with a presentation, general presentation for the navigation through uncertainty, agro-ecological system affected by dynamic impact of climate change. And the second to this is a general presentation. It will be followed up by Dr. Ismail Surageddin. Dr. Ismail Surageddin was Vice President of the World Bank for environmental issue, and before that for a couple of other things. And he was the chair of the CGIAR as well, among other things. I mean, if I start talking, but he's, if you go back to the web page, you can see all the bios for all the colleagues. Dr. Ali Abu Sab, who is Director of Central West Asia and North Africa in the CGIAR, as well as he is the Director of ICARDA. And then we will be joined by Dr. Asmahan El-Wafi, and already we have Dr. Simon Iho, and Dr. Simon is covering climate change and food security in Africa's dryland. I hope that Dr. Agrawal, joining with Dr. Raj Paruda, they are going to present plant genetic resources issues. And I hope as well that we have a connection with Professor Alia Rafa. She is going to speak about humanity and nature. And I hope that we can get connected as well to Latin America, where there is a case study in America on carbon management and sequestration in agriculture. Professor Lal Rutan is on the flight now. He's going back home, and he cannot get in touch with us, but we will put in the web his presentation as a video. Professor Lal Rutan has worked all his life in carbon sequestration, and therefore we have been accused, Ahlan Dr. Asman, we've been accused in agriculture that we produce a lot of carbon, but Professor Lal Rutan was going to cover that agriculture as well is involved in sequestration of carbon and injecting it in the soil. Let me just go back and welcome the presence of Dr. Asmahan El-Wafi, the Director of the CGIAR, and therefore she will be with us and she will close this session. Hopefully we have a big suggestion for platforms in the future to achieve what we are up to. Let me just start with the presentation, which I'll try to go through. And next, please. I'll do it from here. Okay. How can we live with 4 centigrade? You can see in this slide that the World Bank was warning that we do not want to live in a world with 4 centigrade. As we know, that the increase of temperature now is heading for 3 centigrade, disregarding the Paris Agreement, because it does not listen to what happened in Paris. And it was a great achievement to say that we are going to stop at 1.5 centigrade. It's not happening. Now we are moving very quickly to 2, and from 2 to 3. And this will be a catastrophe for any living organism because any thermoliable tissue or cells is going to be affected. Agriculture production is going to be affected tremendously. In addition to this, we will have melting of the ice sheet everywhere in this planet, and this will cause sea level rise, and the sea level rise will affect the low low elevated land, including all the deltas in the world of the major rivers. In Africa, we have more than 500 million people who live on different deltas like the Nile and Niger and other rivers in Africa which will be affected. And this is a study for 80 deltas in the world. The most vulnerable of them is the Mekong River and the River Nile, but the rest as well are going to be affected. The impact not only will be on agricultural land, because this is the most fertile agricultural land is in these deltas around the world, but also it will impact the human being and physical infrastructure. People has to migrate inland to avoid this catastrophe. Therefore, this is in the delta, for instance, we will have, with 1 meter, we'll have 6 million people who has to move inside the delta in Egypt, and as well as the destruction of a lot of infrastructure and the seawater intrusion. Salinity will increase tremendously, and we will need about 6 or 7 ICBAs which is the center for salinity, to do some work on this direction in the future. This is the salinity impact, as we all know, but as well as there will be an impact with the increase of temperature in aquaculture. We hope we will have a representative of the director of the ICLAM, which is this is a fishery and aquatic life center of the CGIAR. She is going to speak to us. I hope she will be joining later. But we will have an impact on more than 442 species. And the domestic species, as we know, is going to change. The fishermen who are accustomed in certain zones for certain fish, this is a dream. It will disappear. They have to go different distance, because as temperature will affect the agro-ecological zone on the surface of the earth, there will be as well changes in the ecosystem of the oceans. And therefore, zooplankton and phytoplankton, which is the food for this, is going to be affected. The coral reef will be impacted, including the big reef in Australia. As far as the animal concerned, we will have a transfer of disease, the interlink between disease, as well as the capacity for the animal to produce milk, and the different system for managing poultry and as well as dairy production is going to be affected. In brief, we will have a reduction in food globally between 12% to 50% by year 2030 to 50. And this is a catastrophe. At that time, the population will increase. We are expecting in year 2050 that we will have 10 billion people, and now we are about 8.2 billion. And the difference here, the 2 billion, they have to have food to eat. From where this food will come if the climate change is going to reduce up to 50% in certain areas? Therefore, we need to look at science and technology to have an answer. How can we increase our production? How can we minimize the post-harvest losses? And how can we change the pattern of the diet as well as the behavior of the people in eating food for the future? This is a challenge, but I would like to say something about this slide. We know in the world we have 14% only OECD countries, and the rest of the world is the rest. Maybe the rest is the best, but this is not true up till now. What we see here, that this increment of 2 billion people from now until 2050 will come from, 70% of them will come from 24 poorest country in the world. And therefore, I'm just saying this because it's very important for us to know that this is a catastrophe. How these people could sustain themselves, how can we stop out migration? We hear some politicians saying no more immigration. But if you are keen to have no immigration, share your science with others, inject prosperity, and people then can really stay where they are in dignity and honor, rather than being humiliated and they leave their own countries. This is the young people in the world, the proportion of it. It's very important that we know the demography and what's happening to it, because these young people, they could be an asset or they could be a liability. But what we are seeing now, up till now, they are a liability, because these people will find no jobs, they will find no, their livelihood is going to be disrupted tremendously. The climate migration, we have Professor Meyer in Oxford. He said 200 million people by year 2050, but several other people in the literature, they talk about up to 1 billion people will out-migrate from their own homeland at that time. You see this exodus in this slide? It's enormous, and we should be really very careful on this. Let me go back to science. This curve shows you the interest in climate change research and technology. This is research and innovation. It's been increasing for years, and it's now increasing more. But we need science and technology policy. It has to be need-driven, knowledge-based economy. We need to have an enabling environment. We need to have a changing culture. We need to have drastic change in education. All of them, they have to go together in order that we have hope. This list, I'm not going to go through it meticulously, but this is the tools for us to take us and bridge us with the future. If we would like to see a bright future, there is no way but to innovate and excel based on these issues which I'm putting. Remote sensing, there is a lot of advancement in remote sensing. For genomics, we have gene editing, we have a lot of issues related to it, and then we have to encompass all that together. It is not an alternative for us not to have a major transformation in agriculture. We need a revolution in agriculture. I mean, the status quo cannot help us. We cannot move any further with this. We need innovation. We need agriculture 4.0, which we need to shift to precision agriculture. We will implement AI. We will implement IoT and neural networks and all the elements of artificial intelligence could be implemented. We need sensors to know soil moisture, sensors which will give us more better pictures about the well-being of the plants from lack of nutrition to infection with disease. All this is embedded in precision agriculture, which is based in science. Now we go, the cry is for mitigation. But we have to ask ourselves, how fast mitigation could help the 2 billion people who will be increased, as well as the existing poor people on this planet? Mitigation cannot. Therefore, We are not saying stop mitigation, but focus on adaptation. Because the people are in the intensive care unit. You need to help them now. You need to inject elements of adaptation everywhere in the global south to make a difference. You need to move fast, and you need to do it. We need new genetic makeup, and we depend on the gene banks everywhere, including the gene banks which is the CGIAR have. And at the end, I will have a suggestion for this. And we need to produce plants which is tolerant to biotic and abiotic stresses. Coupled with this is the agro-management techniques. I mean, irrigation system has to change. All our agro-management procedures has to change. We need to go for intensification. And the intensification factor could come out of greenhouses or even low tunnels. All sorts of elements for intensification could be applied. Of course, this needs a lot of input from science to nutrition, to pest control, and the rest of it, to harvesting, proper harvesting with less losses. Can we do this without massive capacity building? Can we do this with human beings and young girls and men to be educated on how to use this technology? It cannot be. Then it's alphabetical that human resource development is the basis for this. And therefore our dream is that within this adaptation we can develop C4 rice, which is the dream of a lot of biologists, through genomics. We can have nitrogen-fixing wheat. And lately I will show you that the chromosome of wheat has been broke down. And we need to enhance photosynthetic pathway, and we need to have functional breeding and develop biotic and abiotic varieties. As well as we need to have these agro-management techniques with monitoring sensors, optimize the use of nutrients, remote sensing, simulation modeling, artificial intelligence, and cloud computing. Having said this, really, I'll go back to the gene bank. This gene bank is from one of the CGIAR center, but the next slide is gene bank in Svalbard. I was a vice chair of the board of the crop trust which built up this gene bank, and we had our meetings there in Svalbard. It's built up in glacial mountain. It could host 6 million accession for humanity, and they call it the Noah boat, like to salvage humanity when everything is going to melt. Meanwhile, the work in the CGIAR system, like Icarda, for instance, have bred wheat, especially durum wheat, which is heat tolerant, the heat tolerant production as well in the States for maize. And then here is a slide where there was a breakdown for the chromosome of the wheat, and that's published in Science in 2018. And this is very important because it will let the breeder to change the genetical makeup of wheat. Gene editing as well is a very important tool. This is in Arabidopsis, whereby they got some genes there which is drought tolerant and could help on this. Meanwhile as well, we need to go for natural crops which need less water, but it has high value. Here I'm talking about figs, olives, date palm, as well as pomegranate. This is just an example, but you can do the same in medical plants, which is very important, and it really requires as well different treatment in water consumption. To reduce the methane emission via alternative, we can reduce meat and dairy consumption, essential for lowering methane emission, by shifting to plant-based protein and lab-grown meat, which can significantly reduce agricultural carbon footprint. As well as we can use the advanced CRISPR Cas9 and synthetic protein production, which could play a very good role in cutting methane emission. Therefore, there is two ways. Either you produce synthetic meat, or you can use genomics, especially gene editing, in minimizing methane. This is the synthetic meat, which is being produced in the States and now produced in other countries. And not only they have meat, but they have chicken as well, as you can see, which is cell-cultured. And here, an ice cream, which is not coming from milk from the cow. It's synthetic milk again. As well as we have the 3D printer, which will make a lot of difference. Here we are talking about the agriculture 4.0. As I mentioned before, it used machine learning and image processing, neural network and blockchain, bioinformatics, as well as remote sensing and simulation models. And here it's exactly, this picture is related to all the activities we have in agro-management techniques, which has to be renovated. Even in aquaculture, we need to go for intensive aquaculture to increase our production per unit and minimize water use consumption, not only in inland fishery, but as well as in the ocean. There is a lot of mechanisms and management systems now, which is totally different from the past. And we need to look at the interlink between food and water and energy, and see the risk which could happen if we don't balance these linkages between the three. Colleagues, we have in the global south, we have lack of coping capacity, we have lack of adaptive capacity, and it needs our effort, and people like Dr. Ismail Swaguddin is working very hard to look at alternative policies and financial system to help the developing countries to address this lack of adaptive and coping capacity. As well as we need to make an assessment. Secretary Guterres of the UN has said several times, early warning now. People need to know what's going to happen to them now. And to do this, we need to have a proper assessment. All the assessment we had from the IPCC is an assessment on the global level. We need to go to a regional level and then to a local level. How we are going to do this is, it has to have a campaign, and we need to have this assessment done, because in the local level, this is where it counts. This is where the people are. This is where the harm of the loss and damage happen. As you can see here, you can have a problem analysis and system analysis, as well as solutions, and you can raise up, catalog all these areas and look at the shift, because with climate change, there will be shifting of the agroecology all the time. If you look at this valley, for instance, it's quite different. If it is with temperature increase 3 to 4 centigrade, it will be totally different. And therefore, we need to tell the people who live in this valley what will happen to them exactly. And this, we can upscale this and transfer it to other similar locations on the globe. If we have all this computerized, it can be done easily. And it can be connected to the early warning system for these people, and therefore they will know what appropriate, because the cropping system is going to change. But what crops they will plant with a new scenario. Therefore, all the organization working on the field of agriculture, FAO, the CGIAR, regional organization, is going to participate in doing this with the national agricultural research systems. Agriculture is very ancient, and this is, you can see in old Egypt, but as we know, all of us, that some areas is going to get hotter and drier, and some areas is going to get wetter. We are moving toward extreme water poverty, and the area with the red, it's total extreme water poverty. I think Jordan is the worst in the whole world. Usually we are talking about the world average is 7,000 cubic meter per person per year. In Jordan, it's 140 cubic meter per year. And other countries are anything below 1,000 is water poverty. Anything below 500 meter, it's acute water poverty. And we are heading for this. We need to put new irrigation techniques. We need to have intensification through structures like this greenhouse. We need to use this for producing fodder for animal production, as well as we need to have nutrient film techniques to optimize water use, and we need to go for water harvesting. The interlink between food and financial crisis, as well as political stability and political security, was introduced by Joachim von Braun, who's the director of IFBRI from the CGIAR. We need to avoid this snakes and ladder. We need to know what we are going to do. Then we avoid the tail of the snake, and we go for the ladders which will bring us to success, hopefully. We need to avoid this issue of race and gender and age and ethnicity. We need to go beyond this. We need to have hope. In Copenhagen meeting, we said Copenhagen, but didn't happen. And when I attended Cancun, we said in Cancun, yes, we can. We didn't. And therefore, Mr. Obama here is saying, I am sorry, we could have done it before, but we didn't. I'm afraid that the coming president, I don't know what he's going to say. But people like Borlaug, Dr. Borlaug is a Nobel Prize winner, and he is the man who led the Green Revolution with our colleagues in India. And here, ICARDA was honoring him, and he is a man who has this political will. Here is Dr. Surajuddin with Mandela. This Mandela was one of these heroes who really see reality. Another one is Abdul Kalam from India. Dr. Abdul Kalam has been involved in science, but he looked at humanity, he looked at what we can do to make a difference in the future. We need to have resilience knowledge for mankind. We need to go over this divide between the have and have not. We need to share knowledge of science between the advanced countries and the developing countries. We need a shift of consciousness on the part of the have and the have not, and a new understanding of the oneness of humanity. I do thank you. And now we can go directly to Dr. Ismail Surajuddin. Please can take the floor.
This is not working. Is it working? Okay, you're hearing it? Okay. The main thing is that you're hearing it. That's okay. I think Dr. Adel has given us a very extensive presentation, that summarized the situation we are in, and also how science has to remain the fundamental means by which we will go against this challenge. I would like to add a few things. Generally, I will simply say that we are not on the right path for dealing with climate change. We were going on the right path for fighting poverty and hunger, except that in the last few years we have had significant setbacks in the number of hungry people around the world. That has come partly because of the pandemic, partly because the major reduction in poverty that we witnessed between the Millennium Development Goals of 2000 and the Sustainable Development Goals of 2015 were largely due to the enormous effort in China, which successfully lifted 700 million people above the poverty line. An unprecedented feat, but then the rest of the countries, inequality, poverty, and hunger continues to be a major problem. So we need to, I think, recognize, as Dr. Adel has said, the problems that climate change is adding to that, from extreme weather events to erratic floods and droughts. And in many parts, for example, of the poorest areas in Africa, where people depend on rainfall, erratic rainfall can lead to catastrophes and even famines. And thus, we need to reassess many of the things that we are thinking of. And as Dr. Adel also mentioned, but perhaps not sufficiently, I would like to underline the drylands. The drylands represent about 40% of the surface of the planet and has 40% of the population, but has 80% of those in extreme poverty. So the people in extreme poverty represent that much. And we have witnessed also the fact that these people are subject to enormous pressures from climate change. And I have to add also from conflict. There are conflicts among these very poor countries, from Sudan to Chad to Niger and so on. And that adds to the fragility of the situation and the exposure of the people there. And so how do we deal with that? Well, to me, one of the fundamental means when we talk about dealing between emissions and adaptation and resilience is the transformation of the agricultural sector. Why do I say this? Because right now the agricultural sector is, the food and agricultural sector is grossly mismanaged. We have a waste of about 30 to 35% of food produced does not reach the consumers. In parts of Africa, for example, very poor Africa, post-harvest losses can run 30 to 35%, but that is due to the very poor infrastructure. There's no storage capacity, there's no transport capacity to take the food to the cities and so on. And among the rich countries, there's about 30% of the food is thrown away. And so it's an amazing wastage that is there, that simply major improvements in efficiency would help a lot. Secondly, water use efficiency. Agriculture consumes about 70% of global water withdrawals, about 2/3 to 70%. And we use enormous amounts of water in conventional farming, so that to produce a ton of rice would consume 2,000 to 5,000 tons of water. To produce a ton of wheat would consume 1,200 tons of water, and that has to change. Water use efficiency is another major area because of the freshness. The freshwater hydrological cycle is being disturbed. And for the first time in humanity, we are witnessing significant disturbance in the hydrological cycle, which has been taken for granted, and now we have to recognize that it is a global common good that has been mismanaged. We move on and say, okay, what can we do about that? How do we transform agriculture? And I say, agriculture is different from any other sector. Whereas in other sectors we say, what can we do to reduce the energy intensity and therefore reduce the requirements for emissions that accompany it, maybe by changing energy sources and so on. Agriculture, I believe, that now produces about 22 to 23% of global emissions, can not only become a zero emission sector, it can become a sector that significantly reduces carbon emissions from others. My friends, it is insane to be building factories for carbon capture from the air in Switzerland that will cost $100 per ton of CO2 when plants are nature's own system of capturing CO2, putting it on the ground and producing oxygen. We are all on this planet, we are all guests of the green plants and the farmers who tend them. And it behooves us to remember it. And it also behooves us to remember that especially in many of the poorest communities, it is women who are the backbone of that society. So the gender dimension is extremely important. And when we talked about conflict, women are most at risk in conflict, but they are also those who succeed to stretch links of peace between communities much more than the men. So that's just a general thought. So what do we do next? Well, we need two things for that, not only good policies, which we can have, but we also need innovation and finance. So on the innovation side, Dr. Adel gave us examples of some of the things from C3 to C4 pathways, nitrogen fixation in the soil for cereals, not just legumes, and so on. But the fact remains that beyond that, we still have to recognize that there's totally new things in science that are coming in with artificial intelligence and ICT. So with the ICT, we now have the possibility of doing really very high-powered analysis from remote sensing in space that is then carried down to individual fields. And then you can communicate that, analyze the information, so spectral analysis and the like. You can do integrated soil, nutrient, and water management at the field level, communicate that to the farmers through that single most powerful device that most people never imagined before but now take for granted, their mobile phones. We have seen this among the poorest communities. In East Africa, M-Pesa banking system was built on very poor people having access and using their telephones. In Bangladesh, a very poor country, they pioneered with Muhammad Yunus with the Grameen Bank, Grameen Phone, which showed that even very poor landless farm women in remote areas could use mobile phones for effective benefit. So that also would include early warning systems and other ways of reaching the farmers. But with AI, there's a very interesting program that I saw 1.5 years ago. It was being piloted and tested in India and Ethiopia. And this is where the farmer looks at their field and speaks in their local language, the local dialect of the farmer, on a prepared fast dialed. He gets an AI and he simply describes what he sees as his problem. And the AI then gives a prepared answer and can send anywhere between a 30-second to 60-second video that he can see what the recommendation for that farmer to do is. And now the AI was able to answer about 70% of the questions. And where it can't, it reverts to a technical expert who doesn't have to go to the field to see, but can then speak with the farmer, who can also simply show things with the phone. So this new way of reducing the pressure on the agricultural extension worker is extremely important, because we need to bring the best of science to the poorest people and what they can afford. And then, of course, there is the new biology. And Dr. Adel gave us some examples from the protein from plants and the pseudo meats and the cell meats and so on. But there's also single cell proteins where you can, microbial production and microbiology can produce proteins on a large scale for feed and for food. There's also discoveries being done right now about seaweed and how edible seaweed can be produced, which has two major advantages. It doesn't use land and it doesn't use fresh water. And it requires very little attendance by humans. We simply help it get started, then we harvest the results later on. And that's another example of where these possibilities are. So how are we going to do that? Can we really transform the agricultural sector from being a major contributor to the emissions problems of today to becoming a major contributor to the solutions? And my answer is yes. Yes, we can. And I'll tell you why. We mentioned the Green Revolution. And in the Green Revolution in India, you have to remember that India in the 1950s was unable to feed 450 million people. And people were worried that there would be a famine coming up there no matter what. But surprisingly, with Norman Borlaug and other colleagues from India, Ramanian and MS Swaminathan and others, had an enormous impact. The Green Revolution, within less than 2 decades, basically more than doubled production. In fact, it was amazing what was done. Now you have to remember that we're talking about a period when genetics did not exist. 1960s, people did not know, I mean, the famous paper, Watson and Crick, describing the double helix is only 1953, much less the analysis of genomes and all of that that comes later. So people were looking at plants and choosing plants like that on phenotype. They didn't know what gave this plant resistance and not. And despite that, there was this enormous transformation. It did rely on increases in fertilizer and in irrigation. But here's the most amazing thing I have to tell you. That in India, if you look where they were in 61 and where they are now, well, not quite, even 5 years ago, crop production was multiplied by 5 times, and now India is a major exporter. Horticulture production increased to 400 million tons, and now they are number 2 in the world. Milk production increased, and it's now number 1 in the world. That displaced the United States as being the number 1 milk producer. And the fish production increased 15 times, and they're now number 2 in the world in aquatic fish production. An amazing transformation from a country that couldn't feed 450 and now can not only reach 1,400 but can extend it. So finally, here's my answer. If we could do that with the technology of the 1960s, the infrastructure of the 1960s, and the communication of the 1960s, yes, we can transform agriculture today with the technology, communications, and infrastructure that we have, and there's no reason why we shouldn't turn it from being part of the problem to turning it to be part of the solution. The finance we can find, and I can provide you with answers on that if you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Swaguddin, for this coverage. I would like to then now apologize for our colleagues who are online, and we need to hear them, but there was some, we were not informed that they are all here, but I would like to welcome them. This is Dr. Simon Ihu. Dr. Simon is the director of Africa in the CGIAR, and of course Dr. Ali Abu Saba, as I mentioned, he is the director of C1 and he's director of ICARDA as well. I would like to welcome Dr. Agrawal, and our colleague from the World Fish, Michel. Let me start with Dr. Simon. Dr. Simon, the floor is yours. We are going to really maintain 7 minutes because we didn't expect that all of you will join. That's why I'd like to welcome you, and please go ahead, Dr. Simon, for 7 minutes, and then we will continue with the colleagues.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thanks.
And I had a bit of a technological challenge. I hope you see my screen.
Oh, the screen is there as well.
I hope.
The screen came when Dr. Asman entered the room.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm talking about the PowerPoint.
Yeah, the PowerPoint
Okay.
is clear. Please
Okay.
go ahead.
No,
Go.
Dr. Adel, thank you so much. I'll be very short, and because you and Dr. Sarah Jeldin said it all, so I will try to be as brief as possible. I want to say that this particular presentation I'm going to make is shared by myself, Dr. Hafez Ghanem, whom you know very well, former VP at the World Bank, a fellow at Brookings, Stephen Wero Omamo, who is Director for Africa for IFPRI at this moment, and Dr. Shakib Janan, who is the Director for Sustainable Development for West Africa and Central Africa at the World Bank. Basically, I want to say that the induced hazard like drought, floods, and storm, which have increased in frequency and severity, over the past decade, are really impacting a lot on Africa. And this is really, this graph that you can see here, for example, from 2002 to 2021, Africa experienced nearly 800 floods, okay, and 130 droughts, which account for more than half of all the natural disasters on the continent. So the climate change impact in Africa is real, okay, in the sense that the temperature in Africa are rising at twice the global average, okay, and it is really creating a huge problem. This accelerated warming is causing more intense drought, reduced water availability, and harming also crop and livestock that people depend on. Okay, the focus of the paper that we worked on, which Dr. Adel, you are leading as a main editor, is focusing a lot on the dryland of Africa, particularly on the Sahel and on Horn of Africa, where this region in Africa are witnessing prolonged drought and are also home to millions of food insecure people. For example, in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia alone, we have some over 22 million people who are currently facing acute food insecurity, and also with 5 below average rainy seasons in a row, these areas urgently need support to adapt and recover. Now, you have said it, Dr. Adel, but also Dr. Sarah Jeldin, the role of science become quite important, okay? Science and technology are essential to overcoming the climate challenges in this part of the world. So investment in drought-resistant crops, investment in water efficient irrigation and digital farming technologies offer pathways to resilience. And it's all known. It's been published a lot. Agricultural research yields a tenfold return on investment, making it a smart approach for both climate adaptation and food security. Now, the other aspect also mentioned by you is the digital solution. How can we take advantage really of the digital solutions, this fourth industrial revolution, because Africa is at a situation where you no longer need to go through the same process that other countries went through, because you can jump and use the digital solution as the solution to really address the problem of food insecurity in Africa. So digital platform like e-commerce and mobile apps that empower farmers by connecting them to markets and providing real-time information on weather and prices is essential. While these tools have great potential, rural areas often lack reliable internet access, so improvement in connectivity will be crucial. The other area that I want to also mention, not to ignore, is the private sector engagement. The private sector plays a critical role in climate adaptation. So partnership with institutions like the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and similar multilateral organizations, today are increasing access to fertilizer and seed, helping to improve yield through programs that they are supporting through the private sector windows. This is quite important. So private sector can support the development of resilient infrastructure. How can we work with them to ensure that their contribution is well appreciated? In terms of appeal, is really the more international support is needed. Today, Sub-Saharan Africa requires approximately 50 billion annually for adaptation and 190 billion for mitigation, according to the IMF. But today, we have concessional climate flows that are below 16 billion in 2020, for example, and Africa remains completely underfunded for its estimated total need of 240 billion. I mean, I've put it together the amount needed for adaptation, 50 billion, and the amount needed for mitigation. So what is needed is really a different way of addressing this. That's why in our paper, we are making an appeal for the creation of a green bank, that will actually help to raise climate finance to the scale that's needed to support Africa. So I want to end here. The paper that we have has a lot of information, but in terms of key recommendations, to address these challenges, we recommend a 5-pillar approach between government and organization, leveraging scientific research, enhancing trade, securing state finance, and strengthening international support. I mentioned the creation of a green bank and debt for climate swaps that could alleviate debt burden while funding critical green projects. I think this is a proposal that we need to be able to examine, and I hope that in Baku, where you are now, this kind of question can be looked at critically. So in conclusion, let me say that Africa's drylands face significant risk due to climate change. However, with sustained support and global support, well-structured adaptations, we can work together to build a resilient food system that will secure Africa's future. Let me stop here, Dr. Adel, and thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation at this webinar. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Simon, for a comprehensive presentation, as well with suggestions, which is very well taken, and expectation of the outcome of COP29 and the initiation of the Green Bank. I hope maybe Dr. Ismail Saghdin will take it further in the closing remarks. Let me just move directly. I will have a message to Mario Allegri. Mario, we didn't expect that you will join, but it's great that you joined. You may really put one point or two about Latin America before the end of the session, Mario. Let me go back to Dr. Agrawal. Dr. Agrawal, she co-chaired with Dr. Paruda the chapter in the book on genetic resources. Dr. Agrawal, the floor is yours, and then after that, we'll hear from our colleague, Dr. Ali Abu Sabah. Please, Dr. Agrawal.
Thank you, Professor Adel. I hope I am audible.
Yes,
very good morning.
You are. Please go ahead. Good
Very
morning.
good morning.
Yeah,
And thank you for providing this opportunity. I'm making this presentation on behalf of Dr. Raj Paroda, formerly the Director General of ICAR and Secretary of DARE, Government of India. And this chapter has been co-authored with him by me and another colleague, Dr. Kuldeep Tripathi. I am currently working as the Director of the Directorate of Knowledge Management in Agriculture, the premier organization under ICAR involved in knowledge dissemination. So prior to that, I have spent around 30 years in the area of plant genetic resources, which is what our topic focuses on, how plant genetic resources will be used for adaptation to climate change, specifically in the drylands. As you have already set the ground, what are the challenges being faced in terms of climate change? I would like to flag the challenges vis-a-vis plant genetic resources. That is the loss of biodiversity, the climate change itself, increased pest and disease incidences in the agricultural systems. Most importantly, the genetic erosion that is occurring in plant genetic resources around the globe, and the issue of access and benefit sharing of between exchange of genetic resources. As would be apparent in this COP, and as everybody has flagged the issue, climate change is a real today's reality, not a myth. Estimates, as you have already mentioned, in fact, now today you mentioned something about 3 degrees rise in temperature, global temperatures that may be witnessed very soon. So I'm sorry, the slide has changed.
Okay, you can bridge it because of time, Dr. Agarwal.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So the climate change itself impacts agriculture, as we all know, and has been mentioned in many ways in terms of crop yield, fisheries, agroforestry, livestock, and that is quite tremendous. More specifically in the drylands, where the expansion of drylands is likely to occur in areas where rainfall is going to be impacted. And while biodiversity loss has been occurring over the centuries, but in today's climate change scenario, biodiversity loss, the climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss. But as already mentioned by Dr. Ismail, biodiversity itself can contribute towards climate change mitigation as well as adaptation. So this chapter particularly focused on Indian agriculture and Indian plant genetic resources vis-a-vis climate change. As already Dr. Ismail has mentioned, we have had a turnaround from the 1960s in our agricultural scenario. And whereas we have now become from food importers to food exporters, still 50% of our agriculture still relies on rain-fed agriculture. And that is something under threat in the climate change scenario. Interestingly, some of our drylands have very interesting features, including having a rich biodiversity, which is very preserved quite uniquely, and it has vast potential for the future in the changed climate scenario. It is rich floristically, more than 682 species and belonging to 87 families of different kinds of crops, as has been listed. And these are not only rich in numbers, we are also rich in genetic diversity. Now, it is this genetic diversity that needs to be focused, to be collected, evaluated, and conserved to as a preparedness for any future challenges that we require. So these are large collections that have been made over the last 5 or 6 decades that are being constantly evaluated to discover genes that will be required for changes in the climate. So whether be it drought tolerance, heat tolerance, change in photoperiod, change in rainfall pattern, the genes need to be discovered from these genetic resources. A large number of useful species exist in this climate that are not only useful in terms of food or horticultural crops, but also forages and feed crops. For instance, the Thar Desert in the Great Indian Thar Desert has this species called Prosopis cinerea, which is one of the most valued trees in the desert. And in fact, land over there is assessed by the number of trees present. It is a multi-purpose tree that has many genes to be discovered for heat and drought tolerance. There are similar species which have multi-purpose use like Salvadora olidae, a highly salt-tolerant species, a large number of fruit and crop species that can be easily cultivated in drylands. So all these need to be discovered, documented. In fact, a red data book is required on some of the species which are disappearing, and there is need to promote new diversified crops in these dryland areas. For instance, pomegranate is one crop that is gaining great importance. We are still working on how to improve its yield to match global levels. Another important crop that has great potential in our drylands is the date palm. Uh, right now, the area under cultivation is low, but through tissue culture technology, this is being increased tremendously. Mention was already made of how a large number of medicinal plants provide livelihood to people in the drylands. This is one example of aloe, which has great potential in medicinal and cosmetic industry that has gained a lot of importance in India, and a large diversity has been accumulated. Now, we are all familiar with the in situ and ex situ methods of conservation that are being practiced very systematically in India as well as around the globe. About say 7.4 million accessions are managed through the CGIAR gene banks, and this is a very good uh, effort that needs further funding and further support in the climate change scenario. In fact, today we talk about transitive conservation of plant genetic resources, where more than one method of conservation is required for a holistic conservation of the entire genetic resource uh, collection. The the challenge in genetic resource conservation has been effective use of the germplasm kept in the gene banks, and this is because of lack of enough data and uh, accession level information that is available for each material stored in gene banks. Now efforts are being made using new science and technology for its rapid and detailed characterization and evaluation using all the modern techniques already mentioned by the previous speakers. And there are strategies that have been devised to develop core and mini core collections using new science technologies and to develop trace based collections through systematic discovery and to develop robust genetic information systems so that all the information available in gene banks can be effectively used by breeders to prepare for the climate change and the changing scenario in agriculture. So the next two slides give in detail the way forward that has been recommended in our chapter. And since time is short, I will not like to repeat because most of the points have been mentioned by Professor Adel and Professor Ismail. So I would like to thank the organizers for this, giving us this opportunity. And thank you very much. Over to Professor Adel.
Thank you, Professor Agarwal, and thank Dr. Paruda for us. And
Sure.
it's great that you mentioned a lot of viable points, and one of these points is how we can have in the passports of the gene bank a molecular data of what is there, not only morphological description and geo-referencing for the geographical position of the collection. Thank you very much, and I would like now, thank you very much, Acha. Let me move now to another ecosystem which we all treasure. This is the ocean, the water, the fisheries, and the aquatic life. And let me go to Dr. Michelle, and she's talking on behalf of ICLARM of the CGIAR. Please, Dr. Michelle, the floor is yours. 7 minutes, please, because we are running out of time. Please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Real pleasure to be joining you virtually. I'm actually leaving for the airport to go to Baku in 2 hours. So I'll be seeing you all in person shortly. Let me share my screen.
Dr. Ali, okay, go ahead. Please.
Okay. Yes, many thanks. So today I want to just briefly talk about impacts of climate change on an often forgotten part of our food system, which is our inland and ocean fisheries and aquaculture, which collectively I'll refer to as aquatic foods. And as you may be aware, aquatic foods are a really important part of our global food system. They offer a high quality, affordable, low carbon source of nutrition for billions of people around the world. An estimated 3.2 billion people depend on aquatic foods as an essential source of protein, but in addition to that, they are also rich in essential micronutrients like calcium, iron, and omega-3 fatty acids. So therefore really important for especially maternal and child health. And aquatic foods provide livelihoods to nearly 500 million people, are an essential part of our global economy, generally have a low carbon footprint, and interestingly, they are also highly diverse. So currently more than 2,500 species of aquatic foods are caught or captured around the world. And because aquatic foods connect so tightly to the ecosystems in which they are produced, they are highly threatened by a diversity of environmental stressors. So of course, climate change is one of them, but I just wanted to highlight here today also how oftentimes climate change interacts with other environmental threats, which may include overfishing and poor governance, habitat degradation, and pollution, and then also lack of access to resources for small-scale fishers and fish farmers, as well as inequalities in our food systems. Aquatic foods collectively face a diversity of climate threats, and some of these are quite unique to aquatic foods and not found in terrestrial food systems, highlighting the importance of really tailored solutions for the sector. So we see that in marine fisheries due to warming oceans and changing ocean currents and changing in nutrient production, we see that fish are already beginning to move. They tend to be moving from the tropics northward, and species are also becoming less productive. Ocean acidification is threatening coral reef ecosystems as well as shellfish. And of course, sea level rise and melting sea ice are restructuring many ecosystems. For our freshwater fisheries as well as freshwater aquaculture, we see that the more terrestrial threats like floods and droughts and heat waves are a lot more important there. And in the aquaculture sector, we of course see also the connections to feed production, especially in both in terrestrial crops, but also fish meal and fish oil from wild capture fisheries are an important ingredient for aquaculture production. And now, due to new models emerging, we are able to make increasingly better predictions on what will happen to our fisheries in the future. So these are maps from a recently released report by FAO from the so-called FishMIC project, where they compared consolidated evidence across different types of ecosystem models. On the top, we see projections for the middle of the century, at the bottom for the end of the century. And the main takeaway here is that, and then with low emissions on the left, high emissions on the right. And the main takeaway here is that under both scenarios, under medium emissions, we're starting to see declines in fish production by more than 10% in most countries around the world. And by the end of the century, under high emission scenarios, we're seeing that in 48 countries, fish production is declining by more than 30%. And this is posing significant risks to especially the countries that rely on aquatic foods for their food and nutrition security, in many, including many island states, as well as top producers such as China and Peru. And I'll just go over this really quickly in the interest of time, but this is from a study in 2021 where we looked at the risk that climate change poses to the many benefits that aquatic foods deliver. And the key takeaway here is that those most impacted by climate change are those that are most reliant on the resource. And many island states and countries in coastal and central Africa will face very high climate risk to their blue food systems already by 2050. But I think another important key takeaway here is that in our assessment, none of the countries faced low climate risk. So even though we see that global north countries may be less vulnerable or dependent on aquatic foods, really the need to find solutions for climate adaptation and resilience will be shared by all. And then luckily, those solutions are available. So earlier this year at New York Climate Week, Rollfish, together with partners at Stanford, FAO, EDF, and others, launched this report on integrating aquatic foods or blue foods into national climate strategies based on a review of all available adaptation and mitigation options available to us at this point in time. And here, I will not bore you by going into every single one of these options. There's three main takeaways from this particular slide, which shows all of the policy options in our report. The first takeaway is that, as you can see, many solutions are currently already available. However, at this point in time, it's estimated that adaptation needs for the aquatic food sector will be around 4.8 billion by 2030 each year. But current investments are only around $200 million each year. So there is a huge array of solutions that are available and ready for increased investment. The second thing I wanted to highlight is that many of the solutions that we identified are actually have really strong co-benefits with other sustainable development outcomes, including food and nutrition security, livelihoods, and biodiversity. Therefore, adding extra reasons as to why investment in this sector is highly lucrative. And then finally, what I wanted to highlight here is that solutions exist not only on the production side, but really across food value chains in the food system. So not only in fisheries and aquaculture production, but we think it's also really important, as some of the speakers highlighted before, to focus on opportunities in supply chains, on the consumption and diet side of food systems, as well as on the ecosystem side, including blue carbon habitats. And with that, I'll wrap up, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Michel. I think now we will arrive to the closing session. Dr. Mario, are you still with us on the line? Okay. Thank you. Let me, colleagues, before we start the closing session now, but there's a couple of slides here. It's only 3 slides. We are talking about the day after COP. Can we go back? No. We'll go to Mario later. We talk about the day after COP 27 and 28 and what we expect from COP 29. And this is Dr. Ismail Sarageddin in his closing remarks. He will walk us through this and what he expects for the future. Next slide, please. And then what we have suggested in this book, which called the Climate Change Sustainable Agroecology in Global Dryland, which is published by CABI just this month. We said in 3 chapters, we talked about the 3 platforms. The 3 platforms is related to the early warning system with continuous assessment of shifting agroecology. You need to change the cropping system. You need to change agro-management techniques, as well as the coordination of the CGIAR system is very important as a major global hub for agricultural research, a platform for collaboration with national, regional, international institutions to harness the synergy and meet the target in short time. We need to bridge the time, and we have so many institutions working on this. But if the CGIAR is empowered to do this job, it will make a difference. How to bring the genetic resources and the tools for adaptation, including agro-management techniques, and with the early warning system, with information to the local people of what will happen to them with climate change. All the institutions in the CGIAR, plus the national system, plus advanced research institution, they can work together to take us there. Next, please. This is how we see it. We see as well all the community for research and development partner will be involved. We need knowledge hubs everywhere. We need the National Agricultural Research System. And of course, FAO is assigned to do this on the UN system, but FAO work together with the CGIAR will be the coordinator with donors from the World Bank and the donors. And we need the crop trust because of Svalbard gene bank is very important for this job. UNDP could be involved, UNIP. Dr. Inga Anderson has worked on biodiversity with the CGIAR for years, and she is familiar with this, and she will welcome working on this platform. I hope that CGIAR could take this and go. As I said, 3 chapters in this book describe this in details. I'm just giving the summary here. Let me invite Dr. Ismail Sarageddin and Dr. Asmahan to join in here. Well, Mario, it's good to see you. I didn't know that you will join. Would you like to say 2 words about Latin America? And then if you have remarks, you can take it if we have time. Dr. Mario.
Well, yes.
Buongiorno.
Well, thank you. But I know that we have a short time to express the case in Latin America. But,
in this case, it's a pleasure to have you with us. And if you have any questions, you can address it after we finish the closing remarks if we have time. It's a pleasure to see you, Mario. And Mario was the head of the Agro in Latin America, and we may see questions from him later. Please, if you would like to come to the podium here, Dr. Ismail and Asmahan, please. Yeah. Dr. Abu Saba as well will join us, but he will join us on the screen. Please, and Dr. Ismail and There is nobody else, but because Abu Sab'a will be in the middle. Our colleague, Dr. Abu Sab'a. Mario, you stay with us. We didn't finish yet. Colleagues, let me start with our colleague Abu Sab'a would like to make some comments before we start. Please go ahead. And then Dr. Ismail, and then Dr. Asmahan will round up the whole session. Yes. Please, our
Okay.
colleague Dr. Abu Sab'a, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adel. Good afternoon, colleagues and everyone in the room. I think in the interest of time, just maybe to add a couple of words. Everything has been said. So I would only emphasize from a CGIAR perspective, how are we responding to this? The CGIAR has two very dedicated centers on the global drylands, split between ICRISAT and ICARDA, with both focusing us on a very specific agroecology, non-tropical drylands, as well as the tropics. And the CGIAR recognized that there is a need for consolidation of capabilities and science. And this is why we have come together, both ICRISAT and ICARDA, together with every other CGIAR centers, and put forward a global dryland strategy that will be launched during COP16, later in KSA, under the overall leadership of Dr. Asmahan, our executive managing director. The second point is that we have been very active consolidating all available technologies that would help improve the resource use efficiency across the world, with emphasis on the drylands in particular, where water remains the most critical factor. And we know that in some parts of the region, we are even heading towards 5 to 6 degrees, especially within the GCC countries and parts of Algeria and others. So in the interest of time and to allow the concluding space, I just wanted to add this very specific remark, and hopefully we'll have other opportunities to engage on other topics as we progress with the meeting. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Asman, Ismail, and Dr. Ad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Ismail, please.
Yes.
I believe everything has been said. I just want to point out that the tremendous success that we mentioned about India was the nucleus that started the CGIAR. Because of that success, the CGIAR was created, and the World Bank and others came in to support that initial work that was done in 4 centers. And the CGIAR continued, and it also gave birth to GFAR, the Global Forum for Agricultural Research, and other institutions. And I'm very, very proud, happy to see Dr. Asmahan in charge of that important institution, because the work that needs to be done right now is very much like that slide that Dr. Adel showed. We need the CGIAR to set the agenda for the strategic research, because you have basic research, the strategic research, applied research, and then adaptive research. So the applied and adaptive is usually done by the national agricultural systems, and the international systems do the strategic and the applied research as well. So you really have a major role to play. The second part, of course, is raising money. And the funding is not going to be, I think, much of a problem, specifically when we can demonstrate that this is a win-win-win situation. Because if you manage to reduce the emissions from agriculture, which is about 22% of global agriculture right now, emissions right now, to actually becoming a net reducer of other CO2, that should be attractive in itself in a large way, specifically if there are going to be what we've been talking about, carbon offsets and carbon markets and so on. Secondly, I think it's also a major win for adaptation and for resilience, and it enables that sector to better fulfill its obligations on the 2 major opening objectives of the Sustainable Development Objectives, fighting poverty and fighting hunger. So it's all an amazing package, and the CGIAR is right at the heart of it. and Dr. Ismahan is right in charge of it. So I'm very happy and very proud to see her doing that, and I believe that we can help her. We'll be there to help you in any way we can, but fundamentally the CGIAR is being called to action one more time, and I think that it has a lot to do, and it's very important to keep reminding it's not a trade-off between emissions and adaptation. It's not or resilience. It's the one thing that can do it all. It's that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think this is great what Dr. Ismail Swaguddin has said. I'll just have one comment before we will hear the final remarks from Dr. Ismail. We are running out of time. Humanity is running out of time. We are in such miserable situation, ethically, morally, and we need, and as well as from the livelihood of the human being on this earth. The CGIAR has great role to play. Food is just one step for the dignity of humanity. And therefore I hope that CGIAR can take this responsibility and run with it. And I think all of us, all the people who are working on the field of food production will help on this as much as they can. The floor is yours, Dr. Asman. And before I do this, I would like to thank you for accepting arranging this in the CGIAR pavilion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adel. So, dear colleague, as we close this session, I think the weight of our discussions and the urgency of our mission resonate very deeply. We are at a crossroad where decisive actions and collaboration will determine the future of some of the world's most vulnerable ecosystems. As you said it, Dr. Ali, as you said it, Dr. Ismail, and all the speakers, dryland. And that's where we have billions who depends on our solutions for survival. I think we face an existential challenge, but one with clear pathways for action. The solution lies in leveraging, as my colleague said, the best science, technology, and partnership. And that's where CGIAR, as the world's largest agriculture research networks, stand ready to collaborate on this journey. Climate change has amplified the challenges in the dryland. A 2-degree temperature rise will significantly disrupt agro-ecosystems, affecting food production, affecting biodiversity and livelihoods. Left unchecked, the degradation of these lands could displace another 50 million people by 2030, which is only in 7 years. This isn't just an environmental crisis, it is a human one. It is the smallholder farmers in West Africa losing their harvest to drought. It is the community in the Middle East grappling with water scarcity. And it is the young child in Central Africa or Central Asia who might face malnutrition because of declining crop yields. But as daunting as these challenges are, they present opportunities for innovation and for transformation. CGIAR and our partners have already demonstrated what is possible when science meets action. Our work across drylands focuses on 3 core areas: sustainable intensification, ecosystem restoration, and empowering communities with the tools they need to adapt and thrive. A few examples might inspire us, in addition of all the examples we heard from the colleagues in presentation. In North Africa and West Asia, drought-tolerant barley and legume varieties have boosted productivity by up to 40%, even in water-stressed conditions. In Ethiopia, conservation agriculture techniques have increased crop yield by 50% while restoring soil health. The integrated desert farming in Egypt has reclaimed 250,000 hectares of desert land, combining water-efficient irrigation, climate-smart crop, and sustainable soil management. These aren't isolated success stories. They are models of scalable, sustainable change brought to bear through strong collaboration. Soon we will be reflecting on the outcomes of COP29. And I think one message will be clear. Knowledge and capacity building must be central to our strategy. We must prioritize our global human resources, capacity building programs, ensure that innovation are not just developed but adopted by empowering local scientists, local farmers, and policymakers to create ripple effects for resilience that spans generations. And let us not forget the need for robust financing, as you mentioned, Dr. Ismail and Dr. Adil. Higher income countries must fulfill their commitment to adaptation and loss and damage fund. Research has shown that every dollar invested in agricultural research and development yield a tenfold return, making this not just a moral imperative, but an economical imperative as well. As we look beyond COP29, our next steps must be bold and unified. CGIAR is committed to establishing the two critical platforms that you mentioned, Dr. Adil. An early warning system to continuously assess shifting agroecologies and preemptively address risk. The second one, an adaptation platform focusing on genetic resources, innovative agro-management technique, and scalable solution tailored to local context. Such initiative will require international collaboration, transcending borders, sectors, and discipline. By working together, we can ensure dryland remain not just habitable, but thriving landscapes of opportunities. So in closing, let us recognize that our work is not merely about addressing the symptom of climate change, but about reimagining our relationship with nature. As stewards of this planet, our responsibility is to adopt a worldview that values interconnectedness between people, ecosystem, and the future we wish to build. And CGIAR stand ready to work with all our partners to achieve that target. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ya Rab, Ameen.